Thank you, Uday. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Governor Jerry Brown. I just have this one personal note. I was privileged to go to the conference that Governor Brown and Michael Bloomberg sponsored on the environment in San Francisco. I don't know what year that was, Governor Brown, but it was a wonderful conference. And there was a section of the conference on religion and the environment that we attended at Grace Cathedral. And at that conference sparked my wife to take a leadership role in environmental education in the Diocese of San Jose and become the chair of the San Jose Environmental Stewards of Our Common Home. And they've done numerous programs in all the parishes in San Jose and that came about mainly because of the conference we attended that Governor Brown sponsored with former Mayor Bloomberg. So I want to just say that Governor Brown has been a tremendous leader in California in the environment, and we appreciate all that he's done to help spread the environmental message. So I wish to introduce him now, and he'll have a few words to say about his current activities and his message on Fratelli Tutti. Thank you, Governor Brown, for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. Just by way of introduction, I have some small experience in the religious life because I was at the Sacred Heart Novitiate in California, the Jesuit place of formation from 1956 to 1960. Most of my life, however, has been devoted to politics. My father was governor of California for 8 years until Ronald Reagan beat him in 1966. I became governor in 1975, and I served for 8 years. And then 28 years later, I served again from 2011 to 2019. So most of my life has been involved in the political domain. I've been mayor, attorney general, secretary of state, chairman of the Democratic Party, and an unsuccessful candidate for president on 3 occasions. I mention that only to give a background of how I've come to understand the world, how I would interpret Fratelli Tutti. This is my experience and how I see things. Now, looking at the, by the one other thing, in addition to politics, I'm the current chairman of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which works at disseminating information about the danger of nuclear mistake or war or miscalculation, and also climate and pandemic. So it's an organization started by, among others, Albert Einstein, and now it devotes itself to warning people and disseminating information about the great existential threats. Secondly, I'm the chair of the California China Climate Institute at Berkeley, at UC rather, the whole UC, with Tsinghua University in China. So we're working with China on climate at a time when American hostility to China is rising quite a bit. So out of that background, let me just comment on Fratelli Tutti. It's a long encyclical, not easy for me to read and to follow, but I get the central idea. And the central idea is radically divergent to the world as I've encountered it. The world of money, the world of power, the world of the market, the world of media. Fratelli Tutti is about brotherhood, it's about the family, it's about love, it's about spirituality, it's about empathy. So we have here really 2 cities. I can reference St. Augustine when he talked about the city of God and the city of man. The city of God is based on the love of God. The city of man is based on self-love. Well, we're in the city of man, and there's plenty of self-love to go around. So there we are. Now, Fratelli Tutti emphasizes community, solidarity, dialogue. Dialogue, particularly as it was developed by Martin Buber in the book I and Thou, written in the 1920s, dealt with the problem of how do we encounter another? Do we experience the other, or do we meet the other? Is the other an object of our imagination or the way we see the world? Or is the other another subjectivity, another person who we meet, who we encounter? That's called I, thou, one subjectivity to another, one person to another. So the Pontiff is presenting his points of view from that perspective, radically different from the world that I know, the world of presidential, gubernatorial, congressional politics. So here we are at a very dangerous point in time. Recently, a book has come out from Oxford, The Precipice, which rates, after very careful consideration, the chances of human extinction, or at least the collapse, the unrecoverable collapse of human civilization, as 1 in 6 in this century. That's over the next 80 years. In the previous century, the authors estimated the risk of extinction was 1 in 100. So things are getting more dangerous. This is a very ominous period that we're in. And I want to talk about, and it is in the spirit of Fratelli Tutti, but it comes from my experience. And that is what I would call planetary realism. We have something called globalism that often refers to business activities. We also have what the Americans talk about, the norm-based world, the rules-based order. That's another kind of construct that operates as a flag for American activities and some of the allies that this country has. I want to juxtapose planetary realism. I say planetary because, like Fratelli Tutti, it's encompassing humanity as a whole, the whole family of people. That is what I mean by planetary. So it's people, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, everyone that is part of this human community. So planetary realism deals with what is common. Pope Francis talked about the common good. Well, planetary realism starts with the common vulnerability. Common vulnerability, common threat. That means a threat to President Xi, President Biden, the people on this Zoom call, watching the YouTube. We're all commonly threatened. Therefore, we have a common interest. Most of the political talk, the diplomatic talk, is about national interest, self-interest. That's what you would expect in the city of man, according to St. Augustine. But we now recognize, or should, the common vulnerability and therefore the common interest that we have. I want to mention 3 things: weapons, nuclear war, particularly modern weapons. That's the first threat. Secondly, we have the climate and that threat. And then we have the pandemic. Those are 3 things I want to talk about because they create, although they create danger, horrible danger, they create the possibility of a consciousness that we're all in it together. We are part of this family, and we all have the same mortality, the same skin, the same brain, similar emotions. So under planetary realism, we have to transcend the national, the American interest. We're seeing now in Afghanistan what a narrow national interest would say. And contrary to what we've been hearing, the American activity, invasion, war in Afghanistan was not based on knowledge, let alone empathy, let alone fraternity or social friendship. No, it was based on a very nationalistic notion that America had the right to send weapons and be there and transform the Afghan society. Now, after 20 years, we find out that that was profoundly mistaken. I'd like to go back in time to 1979 when I was governor the first time in California. I received Indira Gandhi, the president of India. And she came and met me. She was coming to America. She stopped in California, and I received her, part of the protocol of being governor. And I asked Mrs. Gandhi, as I sat with her in the presidential suite at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles, Mrs. Gandhi, what should America do? The Russians have invaded Afghanistan. And she said, do nothing. And I paused, do nothing. That can't be. What do you mean, do nothing? She said, do nothing. Now, of course, Jimmy Carter didn't do nothing. He started the financing of the Mujahideen, picked up by Reagan, and cheered on by Charles Wilson and Charlie Wilson's war. So he fed with $1 billion or more the Mujahideen in killing and disrupting the Russians. All right, so that happened. We know what happened. Then bin Laden and others came out of that. And then we get 9/11. And then we're back in Afghanistan. And here we are 20 years later trying to get those Americans and other friendly folks who helped us in this misgotten adventure to get out. But again, I want to point out, there were people, politicians, diplomats who said, dumb idea, don't mess. Not that the Russians were right in invading, but that when you try to deal with one evil, you can, if you're not wise and awake, create a much bigger evil. That's, I think there's a gospel story about the woman who got rid of one devil and 7 more came back. So that's been the history in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in many other places. So America has a lot to reflect on, and we have a long, long way to go in that. And of course, we can say the same thing about the other countries of the world, China, what they're doing with the Uyghurs, the threatening of Taiwan, the suppression in Hong Kong. And then we have the Russians and the different things that they're doing. So the question, of course, is how do we respond? And the nationalism has a blinding impact, and it blinds us, and we do totally stupid things. It takes my breath away to think that so many brilliant people of both parties, President Bush, President Obama, President Trump, all thinking and helping spend $1 trillion. For what? The Taliban just walked in. They didn't even have to fire a shot. Where did all that $1 trillion go? What were they all dumb? Were they blinded? Were they fanatics? No, they were really thoughtful, educated people who thought they knew what they were doing, but did not. And so they carried on. By the way, there were at least 60,000 Afghans killed, non-combatants. There were like 40,000 combatants killed, a distinction that probably shouldn't even be made. And then there were over 3,000 Americans killed and something like 1,600 NATO people were killed. That is a lot of carnage. That's a lot of evil, all in the name of good. So that ought to wake us up to national interests. And we ought to start thinking of the planetary interest, the common interest, or as Pope Francis would talk about, as the common good. So the other point of these weapons is the nuclear weapon. Russia's now building some nuclear weapon that it can send with nuclear power, so fast you'll never stop it. Americans are going to spend $1.5 trillion building more weapons, even though we have several thousand, as do the Russians. So we've got the ever threat, the dark cloud of a nuclear danger, not just Putin or somebody declaring war, but a mistake. All these weapons are, not all, but hundreds are on hair trigger alert. They can be sent by mistake. It's controlled only by software and frail human beings. And if they go off at a certain level, you would get absolute devastation, maybe even nuclear winter that would starve a billion people. So that's the nuclear threat that ought to wake us up to our common vulnerability, therefore our common interest. And at the very least, we ought to see that the good is to move in the opposite direction and start reducing these weapons instead of building more. But the Chinese are building more, which they have very few compared to America. The British are building more. The Indians are building more. The Pakistanis are building more. And the Russians are building more. And are they worried about it? You couldn't tell by reading the New York Times or the Financial Times or most any other paper you read. It's all okay. But it isn't okay when serious Oxford scholars tell us we got a 1 in 6 chance of civilizational collapse. That's, you might say we're playing Russian roulette with our future. Now, we take up the pandemic. Here we're being told in America we got to get a third shot. Most of the world hasn't even got the first shot. What kind? That doesn't fit with Fratelli Tutti at all. That's not a family, because you've let so many people off in the darkness of absolute neglect and indifference. And by the way, like the war in Afghanistan, it's stupid because the virus mutates the more it infects human beings, human hosts. And we're letting it do that, and it will come back. And then all the people in Europe and America. So this is another common threat, common vulnerability, common interests pulled together. We're on one planet, but that's not the way we think. The virus, the vaccine makers are making billions. They got patents. They have the right. They own it, even though the knowledge was created in large part with government help. So there's an example, practical example, where we have to see this as a family problem. We're all in the family. We got to get those vaccines produced by the billions, not the hundreds of millions. And third shot, okay, how many is that going to be in America? Well, it's almost obscene to talk about that until we figured out how to get Africans and Indians and Southeast Asians vaccinated. This is an imperative. People are talking about it, World Health Organization, but still in the capitals, in the corridors where the big people congregate. And I know the big people. I spent my life rubbing shoulders with the big people. They're asleep. They're like the folks on the Titanic. The evening, the band played, the gourmet food was served. People were in tuxedos, and it hit the iceberg, and down they went. So we're on a Titanic, and it's that level of danger, 1 in 6 chance. So the pandemic ought to wake us up, and COVID is not the last one. There's going to be more, and we have to learn to work together. And as the human family expands into areas we've never been before, our interface with animals and nature will come back to us in the form of these viruses. So that also tells us about population. 8 billion. I mean, the world never had a billion up until probably 1890. And now we got 8, we can go to 9 or 10. Eventually, according to the Club of Rome, that wrote The Limits to Growth, and they predict, some of the authors there, that the world will be at 6 billion, not 8 billion or 10 billion by 2100. Now, how are we going to get there? By war, by plague, or what have you. So there we are. We got to wake up and make changes. Now, climate. I'm sitting here in a Northern California county, Colusa County. The air is filled with soot, with particles that are air. The index is way off the chart because of the fires. The fires are burning, and Northern California and the West and other Mediterranean places are going to burn up. This is inevitable. It's cooked. So we got to figure out a way first to adapt, to mitigate, and we have to way to cut our carbon emissions. 40 billion tons of greenhouse gas every year. We're all living off it. This show is full of fossil fuel built equipment and technology. We need a transformation to get off oil, gas, and coal. That's China, that's Russia, that's the US, that's Europe, that's the whole world. What a challenge. So the Pope has given us a vision, the Good Samaritan, the man in the ditch. Well, we're all in the ditch, and we're all the robbers, and we're all walking by. So that metaphor should inspire us to the larger thought that we're all in it together. We're the human family. We are risking annihilation, and we have to deal with the climate, the pandemic, and weaponry. Final point, last year, the amount of money spent by the human community was 1.9 trillion on weapons, 1.9 trillion. All right, there's a lot of work there. There's a lot of problem. So now probably the biggest thing is don't lose hope. Don't feel it's beyond us. It's in one sense appears to be overwhelming, but the human spirit can triumph. And the Pope has given us an inspiring message, and now it's up to us to be inspired. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Brown. I'd like to welcome my colleague, Professor Sterling Harwood, who will be speaking tomorrow on the coronavirus pandemic and the philosophical aspects of that in the common good. And I see Father Michael Agliardo has joined us also, who will be speaking. He's a head of the U.S.-China Catholic Conference. So I don't know if Dr. Harwood, we'll take Dr. Harwood if you have some comment, and then Father Agliardo, who are with us.
Yes, I have some comments. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. It's a very great pleasure to meet you, Governor Brown. I'm proud to say that in my very first vote that I ever cast in any election, except for maybe school president or something, but any one that put somebody into public office, was a vote for you in the great state of Maryland in 1976 when I was 18 years old. I believe you won the primary in Maryland that year, if I'm remembering correctly. And
yes, I did beat Jimmy Carter. That might have been the high point of my life, but I did win.
Well, I'm glad to have been a part of that, Governor Brown. And I was right then, and I'm right now to be listening to you. And I've been right a few times in between. I've certainly voted for you every time you were on the ballot in California. I live in San Jose, and I've lived here since 1989 when I came out here to teach at San Jose State. So I had a couple of practical suggestions or questions to run by you, please. One is California is literally on fire. I believe we have the biggest fire on record in California history going on right now still, and there's another uncontained fire that has started in just the last few days, I believe. And one was the Dixie Fire, and I can't even keep up with all the different names of the fires. There are so many of them. But I was wondering if there was a way to help fight. I believe that this is partly due to global warming, human-caused global warming. And I was wondering, I read that the federal government owns something like 47% of all land west of the Mississippi. I'm wondering if there's some way we could speak out and try to get solar panels and wind turbines and things that might alleviate the global warming and the droughts and heat associated with it, which I think are leading to these fires or the severity of the fires. Anyway, I wonder if there's any way to promote on federal land, putting more solar panels and wind turbines. I don't know, maybe perhaps more dams or geothermal. I used to hear a lot about, but I don't seem to hear much about anymore. So I know you're a huge supporter of environmentalism, so you must have given some thought to this. So any thoughts you have, I'd love to hear.
Two clear thoughts. One, these fires are very substantially climate induced. And it's happening in Siberia, British Columbia, various aspects of the Mediterranean. Very dangerous. It's not going away. The CO2 at 40 billion, rather the greenhouse gases, which includes methane and others, is going up in the air by more than 40 billion a year. And that's not going to come down. Even if it comes down 10% a year, we're going to keep going and going. Certainly, even if we had a radical shift, it's going to increase. So the fires are going to keep burning and the horror will continue. So the number one thing is get more people, get better strategy, manage the forest better. And we're doing a lot, not enough. Okay, that's the first thing. And we're gonna have to do that worldwide. Second is California is the most committed state in terms of solar, wind, renewable, reducing energy consumption. So I'd say California is doing quite a lot, but it has to do more. And its more has to be emulated by the federal government and the rest of the country, because it's doing a lot less. So California isn't doing enough, but we're doing a hell of a lot more than everybody else. So they got to do more. And China, in many ways, is doing quite a lot, but it's got to get off of coal faster. So yeah, there's a lot to be done. In terms of people listening, we've got to promote, to the extent we have any influence, that the idea that we got to get off fossil fuel. We have to live a life more in harmony with creation, which we're not. So those are my two thoughts.
Thank
Father
you.
Agliardo, do you want to have a comment or welcome to our session?
I
Father
thank you
Agliardo.
very much.
Yeah.
I am a great admirer of Governor Brown and all that he has done for the state of California and for advancing environmental awareness, not only into our consciousness, but also into our legislation and into what we do in the state of California. And in his outreach to China, that's just been incredible. So I'm wondering, though, the big question that many of us have, and I work with China, I run a nonprofit, the U.S.-China Catholic Association. We're wondering, to what extent will China work with religious people? Because environmental issues are not just scientific issues, they're matters that mean something to people, and faith shapes how we understand things. Faith is our meaning system for many people all around the world. So I'm wondering, have you seen any openness in China to cooperate with people of faith on environmental issues?
Good question. So I have not. And I have heard that the Chinese government is removing crosses and other religious symbols from other religions. So I can't tell you. I mean, the Communist Party is the program. They do a lot of good in lifting people above poverty, but they have a fixed idea that they are the number one. They're the total universal organization, and the church, in the mind, I think, of the Chinese, would be a competing organization, and the church must compete for at least some of the loyalty of people, because that's what the church is all about, and it's presenting the good news. So I think it's a worthy goal to press the Chinese, and I would be very interested. And even after the show, I'd like to know how you doing, and just specifically if there's anything I can do. But I do think that there's a fear. I think, quite frankly, as Xi looks at the chaos and division in America, he may say to himself, "Well, I'm glad I got a one-party state. I'm not about to relax it." Well, maybe through your good offices, we can open up space for the church and for religion to make its presence, because we don't have to challenge the regime, but we can present the good news. And these should be compatible. And I know that the Pope has relationships as diplomats dealing with the Chinese. I once, at the request of Mother Teresa, went to China and asked a member of the Politburo, would you let Mother Teresa open up one of her centers so the missionaries of charity could work? But that I struck out. It didn't go. But Mother Teresa, when I worked with her in India, she said, please get me a spot over there in China. So that was in the 80s.
Yeah. We have a question from Robert Graff.
Thank you, Governor Brown.
Yeah. We have a question from our audience, and it is, his name is Robert Graff, and he says, Fratelli Tutti calls for more efficiently organized international institutions. Can the participating universities that are part of this conference research and organize resources for this political statesmanship? since Fratelli Tutti is impacting political institutions, can we organize outside of the government, say universities and foundations and other research groups, to impact some of these questions like we're bringing up, like opening up society more to a wider diversity of people who can speak? Because this is part of the question that we're dealing with, that we seem to have a limited voice to affect political views.
Well, I would say, my opinion, you have to have more of a focus. Fratelli Tutti, it's a very wide-ranging document. It covers tens of thousands of words. So I think we got to zero in on what we're trying to influence. Now, universities, yes, on climate, on the whole research on virus, on climate, nuclear weaponry, weapons in general. Then not just university, but their little brothers called the think tanks. The think tanks, which are fed by the arms industry, and by nation states, Brookings and the various Atlantic Council. There's a dozen major think tanks in Washington. Well, they should be, if you can make connections to witness for this alternative view that transcends national interest. I think you have to find a language that will be able to reach these think tank folks. But remember, the people that got us into Afghanistan and kept us there for 20 years, Obama went to Harvard. I think Bush went to Yale. These people were well educated. So yeah, we need to I think to have some impact, and the church needs more eloquent spokesmen. I remember when Father Hesburgh at Notre Dame would speak on civil rights. I can't name an equivalent cleric or university president that's speaking to these issues. University is bogged down in all sorts of identity issues of one kind or another, when the whole world is under the sword of Damocles. We're under a threat here, and we have to rise to the occasion. So I would definitely feel that the universities can be a source for missionary activity, if I can put it that way.
Anthony Pino, are you with us? I think he's watching on YouTube. Did you have, Mary?
He is watching. He's one of the viewers.
Okay. Any other questions that are, we have about 5 more minutes before we have a break.
I have one more question, if I may, Governor Brown. It's such a great honor and pleasure to speak with you. Cars. Why do we need so many? I hear there's now a shortage of cars. Used car prices are going up. Everybody wants to buy a car. There's a chip shortage. But do we really need this many cars? Can't the church groups and civic groups get together and share cars and really cut down on the number of cars that people have, and just also maybe carpools? It's an old idea. It's nothing new. I'm not claiming to have found anything special here, but it just doesn't seem like we have the will or the coordination. Now that we have the internet, we should be able to do this.
Well, we are learning somewhat, but the roads are very crowded. It is absurd that we have 25 million cars, thereabouts. If you take all the vehicles, the trucks, the trailers, and all the rest of it, the cars are going about 343 billion miles a year. 43 billion, no, 43, what is that? 340 billion miles, that's right. And gasoline, we're using about 18 billion gallons of diesel and gasoline to run all these cars. Now we have to, if you want to look back, California had 300,000 people, as far as we know, for 10,000 years. Now, in the last 100 years, we've added probably 38 million. We have almost 40 million. We have 40 million people. They got 25 million cars. They're using 18 billion gallons of gasoline. It's crazy. And to get around, and where are they all going? What are they all doing? The technology takes over. Technology describes. It's not only do we use technology for good, certain technologies restructure what it is to be human. They restructure our very consciousness. So the car is part of us and we can't think without it. Now, I've supported something like the high-speed rail. There's money in the latest federal spending bill for mass transit, but our lives, our businesses, our Walmart, Costco, parking lots, they're oriented toward the individual car. And yes, we should transition out of that, but that's utopian. So yes, you might be able to find a way, but we can't indulge in fantasy. We have to see the world. That's why I call it planetary realism, not planetary romanticism or planetary utopianism. We have to see the world, and the car is fundamental. The first thing we got to do is get off of the fossil fuel car. And we don't have too many years. Hopefully in the next 15 years, we can get off of that. And California is leading the way, but people are fighting that. The world is using 93 million barrels of oil every year. And the oil companies predict will be up to 100 million barrels. So we got to reverse all that. But who's the we? Is that Biden? Is that McConnell? Is that Pelosi? I mean, we have these governments. We got the Communist Party in China. We got the chaos of Republicans and Democrats. We've got a recall in California. Governance is not something like an instrument panel. You just go press a button for a new outcome. No, we're in a pickle here, and that's why the author of The Precipice says we got a 1 in 6 chance of making it human society. So look concretely. What can we do? We can set examples, carpooling, using Zoom. But boy, this is going to take massive transformation. The Roman Empire didn't fall with one parable from Jesus Christ. It took hundreds of years, martyrs, eloquent preachers. It took what it took for 300-400 years before the Roman Empire was done. Our current market with the socialists on the other side, all promoting growth, fossil fuel, weaponry at $2 trillion a year almost, and the climate and the pandemic and all the rest of it, and the inequality. Wow. The key is don't get overwhelmed. Find a concrete within your grasp ability. So I think this, if I can comment on the Good Samaritan, the key point in the Good Samaritan is when the Samaritan walked by, he was moved. And the Greek word is a very physical word. He was moved inside himself. He felt it in his gut. So you got to start from concrete reality. What's in front of you, where you are. And these more general abstract thoughts, very powerless to change. And I think the Good Samaritan tells us how change occurs.
Thank you.
Jerry, Governor Brown, thank you so much. We're coming to the end of this session. I want to give a few minutes of a break before we start with the next one with Father Agliardo. He'll come on at 12:15, and he's going to be discussing the impact of Laudato Si. Since we've been talking about the environment, we know that Pope Francis, in addition to Fratelli Tutti, has done this wonderful encyclical on the environment. There'll be a meeting coming up in November in Scotland. This is another big topic that our conference is dealing with. And we're so grateful to Governor Brown for his presence with us. And this will be recorded, and we hope you'll pass it on to many people because his message is vital for the future of California, the future of our nation, the future of our world. So thank you, Governor Brown.
Thank you
for inviting me.
We're going to close off for a moment.